Hi and welcome to my channel. We are going to look at another exciting game by Alphazero from the match between Alphazero and Stockfish, and we're just going to dive right into the game. Alphazero with white pieces and Stockfish with black. This was from the part of the match where they didn't use opening book, and as so many times we have the Queen's Indian. Alphazero with white, and it prefers knight to f3 here. We have b6, the Queen's Indian, g3, bishop to a6, and we go with the most common moves here, b3. Bishop b4 is the most common move here, but d5 was played. Bishop to g2, bishop to b4. We have bishop to d2 by Alphazero, and Stockfish retreats bishop back to e7. Now this is a common motif in the Queen's Indian to play bishop b4 check and go back to e7. The idea is that you get the bishop to go to d2 instead of going to b2 where it wants to go. And yeah, this has the added effect that white has to spend some time to get this bishop on the diagonal, and if you do so by going to c3, you also take away the square that the knight wants to go to. So it's a little bit of distraction tactic. Stockfish, Alphazero takes on d5, he takes d5, and knight to c3. With castles, knight to e5, fairly standard opening moves here in the Queen's Indian. And now with the bishop having sort of finished its role here on a6, it goes back to b7. White castles, I didn't really go into why bishop a6 is played, I've done so in other videos. And you can check out the old Alphazero games to see some more about that. Castles, knight b to d7. And here we have a novelty by Alphazero. In this position, the most common move is bishop to f4, repositioning the bishop that was put in an awkward square with the bishop to b4 check move by black. But Alphazero goes here with a4. And this is sort of a typical idea that we see quite often in Alphazero's games. It likes to launch with the pawns on the wings. Harry and Gary. And here it wants to launch with the a pawn. Stockfish played c6 here, which is probably a fine move. But I thought maybe, a5, why not? I mean, if you're worried about white pushing here, a5 seems like a move. White does get a nice position here, rook c1, and has some ideas, maybe knight b5 at some stage. And if black ever goes c6, white can think about opening the center with e4. So definitely some ideas. So maybe this is an interesting idea to look at if you want to play the Queen's Indian, to push with a4, because after c6 Alphazero went on with pawn to a5. Now you can't take this, but this does disrupt your pawn structure horribly, and white will be able to regain this pawn rather easily. And as we know, Alphazero doesn't really care that much for pawns, so it's not a really big deal. Disrupts the pawn structure, and the pawn will be easily recouped. I mean, if you're really worried, you can even just move the knight. Okay, not a good square b1, but if you move it, then you have already an attack by the rook and the bishop, and you will win the pawn back. But the pawn will be won eventually. So Stockfish didn't take on a5. He took on, I don't know, took on e5, d takes e5, and now knight to d7. And as so often happens with these, what they call fawn pawns, you push them, and it's disrupting your opponent. The bishop goes back to c8. And yeah, this is really disrupting black's development on the queen side. However, Stockfish had an idea, and well, first white must care for the e5 pawn, so f4, but now knight to b8 by Stockfish, and the idea of Stockfish was that white can't hold on to this pawn. But as we see in many games by Alphazero, it gives up this pawn. In many cases, it pushes it forward, and sometimes it becomes, a great asset, disturbing the development, becomes a great asset in the endgame. But when you lose it, sometimes it doesn't really matter that much, because you quite often get, you know, files for your rooks in this case, or it takes a lot of time for your opponent to win the pawn back. And in this case, the knight went back to b8, and then you have to capture with a piece on a6, and that's another move. So while Stockfish is thinking about winning a pawn, Alphazero calmly plays king to h1 and gives up the pawn. But okay, having played this prophylactic move, the idea is clear. Alphazero wants to attack pawn to f5. Okay, in some cases this push is looming, so rook to e8 makes a square of the bishop on f8 to fortify the king side. e4, d4 by Stockfish, and now knight to e2. Stockfish decides to force the matters here with bishop to b4. This attacks the pawn on e5, and now another typical Alphazero motif, giving up pawns to attack, to open the position. And Alphazero plays here e6. Stockfish really doesn't have a choice. He has to take here on e6, but now f6. Not taking on e6 because, well, we want to keep this one buried in. And if you manage to do that, you know, this has to spend a move, and this is still stuck. So f6. So the good news is we have opened up the king. The bad news is we have, well, we're currently down 3 pawns. But don't worry, knight to f4, and this knight is incoming. A very nice square on h5, and this will really accentuate the weakness of the black king. Now black does have some choices here. e5 was played. A move like king h8 comes to mind. But white has some ideas. We can play knight to h5 here. We can also in some cases play e5, and then this pawn becomes a problem. In any case, it seems white has compensation, plenty of compensation, and probably even more, because after e5, knight to h5, we're threatening to take this pawn, and after the natural bishop to e7, now a very nice move by Alphazero. Can you find it? What's the best move for white here? We have given up 3 pawns, and we have to keep on attacking or win something back. So which one is it? I'm assuming you came back after pausing the video and you found the move. Rook takes a6. Excellent move, taking advantage of the fact that if you take with the bishop, which Stockfish didn't do, you are getting mated, queen to g4. If you go to the corner, mate immediately. If you go to f7, bishop h3 is the only winning move, and the idea here is to not allow the king to escape. So some sample lines, for example, bishop f8 is the best move, but just to show the trouble that black is in after a move like rook to f8, queen e6. If you go here, then mate. If you go to g6, I will go back, and now I can take on h7 with check. And a nice checkmate here coming up, bishop to e6. So after rook takes a6, king h8 was played. Now you're threatening to take the rook, so the rook retreats, rook to a1. And remarkably, you know, despite giving up all these pawns and winning the piece back, we have material equality, because, well, 3 pawns are usually considered to be equal to a piece. Here, however, black doesn't have, you know, almost any activity for his pieces. I mean, he does have the bishop pair, but what are they really doing? What are they attacking? Where are they going? And meanwhile, the black king is much more weaker than its counterpart on h1, sitting pretty there. And white has some pieces that can attack, already an attack on f6, and you can easily bring more pieces to the attack. So white has the clear upper hand here. h3 to, of course, prevent bishop to g4, which was threatened. And yeah, despite this, it's not very straightforward to win this. And now we see sort of a little bit of, you know how to say, old school computer chess, where there's a lot of shuffling. So first we have, let's have some moves, bishop f1, b5, bishop to e2. A little bit of a puzzling bishop maneuver, but yeah, Alphazero feels that the bishop is better here. Oh, maybe it's not puzzling. I mean, it's staring into its own pawns here. So in some cases, it will have more scope on this side of the board, as we'll see later in the game. So I'll take that back. Queen b6, queen to f1. For now, stopping any pawn advances on the queen side. Bishop d7. And now we have knight to f5. And Stockfish chops this off. So a pretty, significant exchange. We get rid of the bishop pair. And note that Stockfish can't take here on e4 because of bishop f3 and the rook hangs. But from here we have, this old school shuffling that I talked about. I mean, white has the upper hand, but it's not so easy to actually improve the position. So let's just, play through the moves rather quickly. A pawn is attacked, it's protected. Some shuffling. Pawn is attacked and protected. Every day I'm shuffling. Bishop to h4. Okay, taking the pawn on f6, but nothing's happening. h6. Maybe white had some ideas of g5 in some cases. So Alphazero forces h6, which could become a weakness, but it takes some time. Rook h5, queen d3, stopping c4. Tackling with the bishop, not much going on. Black has h6 under control. Rook to f5, queen g8. So yeah, a lot of shuffling. We started the shuffle with a knight exchange on f5 on move 35. So after more shuffling here, we're on move 55 now, and not much has changed. So yeah, a little bit of old school computer chess here with a lot of shuffling. But here, I was wondering here maybe, can black ever play c4? And probably can't, because then you see why the bishop needs to be on this side of the board, as it will cooperate with this bishop pretty nicely, and the rooks will start to feel the heat. So this is too dangerous, so Stockfish has to wait around. But what is Alphazero doing? So we're on move 60 now. More shuffling. King comes to h3, typical Alphazero. It often uses the king to defend pawns. Pawns that might not need defending, but just in case, in some variations, could be important. But then it takes the king back, more shuffling, attacking the a pawn, but it's protected. Bishop d2, bishop f8. So see a lot of this shuffling, and basically nothing happens. Now we're on move 75. We'll keep on going here. Nothing significant until here, move 82, where Stockfish finally does something and pushes with c4. I'm not sure how or if white can improve here. I'll say that Stockfish on my computer gives throughout this a great plus for white, well in the high 1 point something, like 1.5. But again, it's difficult to find a clear path to win the game. But it seems like after, I don't know if Alphazero was baiting Stockfish into finally doing something, but after the position opened up with c4, things start to happen much quicker. We have rook g3, we have a trade here, and rook g2. So okay, now the white king is very secure, and white can now start to go on the offensive. Queen to d3, rook g3, bishop e7, and h5. So this pawn push really, clamps down on this h6 pawn, and black actually has a hard time keeping up with the h6 pawn, because white can very easily swing his forces to the a file or the c file, threaten to penetrate with the queen as well. And if you're stuck, protecting this pawn, you're not going to be able to keep up with it, and the computer actually just gives up the pawn. And from here, things start to go downhill, and I don't want to say easily winning, because most of us would struggle against computers, but a supercomputer against another one, this is fairly easily winning. And after some moves here, everything under control by white. Look at these bishops covering anti-squares and also being covered by their own pieces. And now you can push g5. Queen comes in. Trade. bishop comes back, everything under control, and then queen to e8, check. And the main problem for black is that, well, black resigned. If king h7, I will give you a check and win the bishop. Sorry, that's a must-slip. Win the bishop with check and some more stuff, and then I can just take on g5, protect my bishop, and that's all she wrote. So yeah, an interesting game by Alphazero. I think the meat of the game that I found interesting was in the opening with a novelty a4 and these pawn pushes, these Fawn pawns as they're generally referred to or called. And yeah, it took this strategy to the maximum with the push to a6. Then we saw a typical calm move, king to h1, and an attack on the king side. And I think white's strategy here, okay, pushing forward, sacking the pawns, opening up the position. And this strategy was crowned with a nice move, rook takes a6 here. And we're already on move 26. I don't want to say the rest was a formality because it took, I think, almost 80, more than 80 moves. But, you know, the interesting part was really over. But I just wanted to show the game for completeness sake. But yeah, there you have it. Another game by Alphazero. And I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching, if I have your attention still. And yeah, I'll see you. Bye-bye.